Good afternoon, and welcome to the Presidential Speaker Series. Please take your seats. Please welcome Ariel Campos. Ariel, a native of Naperville, Illinois, is a second-year law student at Tulane Law School, president of the Tulane Latinx Law Student Association, and Diversity and Inclusion Chair for the Student Bar Association.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ariel Campos, and I am a second-year law student at Tulane University and president of the Tulane Latinx Law Student Association. Today, we have the great honor of hearing from Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Not only is Justice Sotomayor a key figure on the Supreme Court of the United States, but she is also the first Latina Supreme Court Justice in this nation's history. Justice Sotomayor was born in the Bronx to Puerto Rican parents and was raised by her mother, a strong and independent woman who instilled the tremendous value of education in her children. Justice Sotomayor took this to heart and excelled in school, receiving top grades and gaining entrance to Princeton University on a full scholarship and subsequently attending Yale Law School. Following law school, Justice Sotomayor worked in the public and private sectors, including receiving appointments to the federal district and appellate courts, followed by her 2009 nomination by President Barack Obama to the United States Supreme Court. Personally, as a law student and a proud Latina who comes from a family of hardworking immigrants hailing from Mexico, I see Justice Sotomayor as everything that I aspire to be as an attorney. When I watched her nomination speech, I saw a fellow Latina woman being appointed to the highest court of our nation. This made me feel that anything was possible for me and others who have not traditionally had a seat at the table in positions of power. She was instrumental in my choice to pursue a career in law, and I am sure that she has inspired countless others to pursue a career in law as well. What I value most about our country is that we created a government that represents and serves all people, no matter what gender, beliefs, color, creed, or origin. We are all human, and we all deserve dignity, justice, and to be treated equally by the nation that we have invested into and built. We are a nation of immigrants, of dreamers, and a beacon of hope to the rest of the world. Justice Sotomayor embodies these values of empathy, understanding, and diversity in all that she does. She consistently takes into account how certain societal factors disproportionately harm different groups and has remained a pillar of hope for the marginalized, the underserved, and the disadvantaged throughout her tenure on the Supreme Court. In these tumultuous times, it is critical that above all, we retain our ability to connect to and understand one another despite any obstacles or divergence of thought that may get in our way. Justice Sotomayor's ability to do this through her work serving on the highest court of our nation is instrumental and incredibly admirable. I want to thank Justice Sotomayor for being here to speak to all of us and to share her insight and her wisdom. To be able to hear from a strong, fearless woman who has fought for justice with such tenacity and fairness is a rare gift. And because she has chosen to take the time to be here today, we are able to gain insight and hopefully grow as individuals as a result. I also want to thank Tulane University, President Fitz for hosting this event, and to the deans of Tulane Law School for bestowing me with the tremendous honor of speaking. It is now my great pleasure to introduce my role model, Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
Wow, there's a lot of you. Hi.
Good evening. Good evening. First of all, Ariel, I want to give a round of applause for Ariel for an incredible introduction. I also have to say what an incredible moment this is for Tulane University. to be able to host somebody who really has become a symbol for not only members of the judiciary and the legal profession, but for our whole country. Really a public figure who epitomizes our goal of public service as well as humanity. I'm not going to go through a formal introduction because we've just heard Ariel's wonderful words, but let me just say I attended law school with Justice Sotomayor 40 years ago.
That's what I'm doing here.
And she was as genuine, as humane, as a fellow law student as she is as a justice of the Supreme Court. And I think that's what gives her such insight and much strength as both a justice and a figure who speaks to us as a country. So anyway, I thank you for being here. I want to give you, first, I should let you know that the excitement at Tulane was so palpable that when we put this up on the website, 30 minutes later it crashed with all the members of the community who wanted to sign up for tickets. So, which probably may not have happened when the Yankees didn't make it into the World Series. But,
I'm a Yankee fan, be careful.
Justice Sotomayor is a great Yankees fan.
But I love the Nationals. That I'm here, it's a tribute to you, because I want to be home watching the game.
So I'm, just to give you an outline, I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we have questions from students in the audience who have pre-submitted questions. So we will go out into the audience after I ask a few questions. And what I would like to do is to start with your new book, Just Ask, Be Different, Be Brave, Be You. It is truly a wonderful children's book, and I should note is the 7th week on the New York Times bestseller week. So, but I must say, you wrote really an extraordinary autobiography, and I think many people thought your next book would be about the court. What led you to write this book?
Well, my follow-up about the court won't happen for a number of years. I'm only there 10 years. Believe it or not, in the history of a Supreme Court justice, that's a little bit of time. So it's too early to sort of evaluate my own self and my jurisprudence, because it's, I think, still growing and developing. So that next book that people have asked me about will take a longer, much longer time. But when I started to think about what I could write next and what I wanted to write next, the first thing that came to mind was a middle school book, because I have a teacher cousin who's a bilingual education middle school teacher who was begging me to take my memoir and turn it into a version for middle school kids. And so I did that. I don't think I have a copy of that with me here. At any rate, that's The Beloved World of Sonia Sotomayor. But the publisher said, how about a young reader's book? And they wanted to do my life story in a young reader's book. And the vision I had for that was, I didn't want to give young readers like the facts of my life. You need to do that. But I wanted to give them a message that was important to me. And for that, I turned to the power of words and books in my life. And Turning Pages was born. And that book, here it is. This one, Turning Pages, is about how words and books have influenced my development in life. And as you should be able to imagine, I have comic books in here, because that was some of my first reading. I have, to be able to figure out how to give myself a shot as a young child of 8 years old, or almost 8 years old, I imagined I was Supergirl. and that I would have her courage in giving myself my insulin injections. So I tell you that part of the story because when they came to me about doing the children's book, I said, on one condition. You have to publish a second children's book, the one that I've been thinking about for 30 years. And I already have the title, and I know what I want to do, and you can't have one without the other. So, just ask. And I'm assuming, Mike, you want to know the story of why it's been around for 30 years or more. I've been a diabetic since I was 7.5 years old. And at the time I was diagnosed, the prognosis for living as a diabetic was not a good one. That has changed dramatically. With the improvement in the quality of insulins and with the new blood testing techniques and control techniques, most young diabetics now have a normal lifespan. Not most, all. If you take care of yourself, you can live as long as anyone else. But that wasn't the case when I was first diagnosed. And I felt, because I was very different from everybody else around me, largely because I was taking insulin every day, but more importantly, I was doing something that I was embarrassed to show other people I was doing it. And so in my 30s, I was in a restaurant in New York, and I was in a very fancy restaurant in New York. And as was my habit then, I got up after I ordered my meal to go to the bathroom to give myself an injection. And I did that, and the bathroom was empty. It was a small bathroom with 2 stalls, and nobody was there. So I just stood at the counter and gave myself my shot. And as I was finishing, a woman walked in. She saw that I was removing my needle and packing it up and putting it back into my kit. And I must have nodded at her or something, but I washed my hands and I left. And at the end of my meal, I was walking out of the restaurant, and as I was walking past her table, I saw her leaning forward, and I overheard her say to her companion, "She's a drug addict." Now, I recently received a letter from someone who said, that story denigrates drug addicts. That's a disease as well. And I don't intend by telling the story to denigrate drug addicts for their conditions. But she was, and she did not say it in a positive way. My immediate reaction was, in fact, shame. And as I stood there and had that shame sort of wash through me, I then had something else, which was a little bubble in my stomach of anger. And I tell kids, anger that's controlled anger, not wild anger where you're screaming and saying things without thought or for a positive purpose, but the kind of anger that makes you say, that's wrong and I want to change that. That's controlled anger. And I stood there as the anger washed over me, and I turned around and I walked back to her table, and I said, "Madam, I'm not a drug addict. I'm a diabetic. And the injection you saw me taking is for my condition, which is diabetes. And the medicine is insulin, and it saves my life every day. Why do you presume when you see people doing something different that they're bad? If you don't understand what people are doing, just ask them." And I turned around and I walked away. But that story stayed with me and has stayed with me my entire life. And as I've grown out of hiding my condition. Poor President Fitz watched me give myself a shot back there because my sugars were a little high. I'm much more open and I talk more openly about it. But what I've learned is that society still treats people who are different with both suspicion and with a sense of distrust and almost fear. Fear that something they have may be contagious, or that somehow it says something negative about that person. And I've had and learned about how people with different life conditions are treated that have broken my heart. So one of the characters in the book is a little girl named Julia. And Julia is modeled after the daughter of one of my closest and oldest friends. Julia has Tourette's syndrome. For those of you who may not know what Tourette's is a body condition where the person who has it has no control over certain things that their body are doing. For some Tourette's people, and I'm talking to a college audience so I can tell you, they curse uncontrollably, or they make sounds that are repetitive and can be piercing at times, or they move or twitch, or their body acts in ways that are not appropriate to being in a certain setting. They also, some blink a lot. Julia blinks a lot. And the artist who worked with me on this, you can see what he did with Julia's blinking. Isn't that precious? But Julia was in a store with her mother one day, and she had one of her moments where she spun out of control. And I told you the body movements are not controllable for these children. And a woman looked at her and said to her, "Don't you have a mother who can control you?" That story broke my heart. She did have a mother who's a school teacher, who took Julia out and put her in the car and came back and gave that lady a piece of her mind. But that story reminded me of how many children who are different don't feel empowered to talk about their differences. How many of us don't feel empowered to talk with them and ask them questions? And how much we don't know about each other. And so Just Ask is the book of my heart. It's the story of 12 different life conditions, among the most common that I knew, not just Tourette's syndrome, but allergies, attention deficit, dyslexia, blindness, deafness, being in a wheelchair. It has 12 of the most common conditions that I know of. And the children are talking about themselves, showing the world how much stronger we are than the rest of you. Do any of you have, or can you imagine, the determination and the strength that every child who's different must have to manage their life every day and still participate fully? That's the part we all miss. That despite all of these differences, not only are we a part of the fabric of our society, we contribute to it. And we make a difference. And so, hence the title, Just Ask, Be Different, Be Brave, Be You. And if you're an adult, you can learn as much as a kid in reading it. How's that?
Let me attest, as somebody who was a child many, many years ago, it's an extraordinary book, and I recommend it to everybody in the audience, whether you're 82 or 12. Um, so,
It's for 4 to 8-year-olds.
So you've clearly been a role model for students across the United States, lawyers, individuals everywhere. But I sort of wonder about who were role models for you growing up. I know you've talked about your mother and grandmother, but I wonder if you could talk a little about who was important for you growing up and why, and over the years.
Is that question, who do we model ourselves after? For me, it started with my mother. My memoir is a tribute to my mother.
Right.
And it's a tribute to my grandmother, by the way. During my confirmation process, the news was focused on my mother because she's here and present. But my grandmother had passed away many years before. And in the middle of the afternoon after my nomination, they're filming my mother and I and asking questions of us. And at the end of it, my mother turned and said, "Sonia, no one's asking about Mercedes." Mercedes was my abuelita, my grandmother. And I said, "I know, Mom, because they're spinning the story this way." But she said, "She was so important to you." I said, "I know. I have to tell her story someday." So that's part of my memoir. But you know, some kids don't have parents or grandparents that they can turn to for a variety of different reasons. Not just that they may not be physically present, but some parents have their own life challenges and they can't mentor in a way that a child might be able to feel the support that I did from my mother and grandmother. And I tell people that what every child who succeeds in life needs is someone who has confidence in them, who actually loves them and believes in them, someone who affirms that they're special. And sometimes it's your parents, sometimes it's a teacher, and I certainly received, my memoir talks about all the teachers in my life who had an impact and made such huge differences in my growth. And then mentors that you pick up as you live your life. And in every educational and professional setting that I've been in, and I talk about this openly in my book, I have found mentors who have helped nourish and support and guide me and help me grow, both spiritually and emotionally. And all of those people are responsible for who I am today. Hence the title of my book, My Beloved World. Because after writing it, I don't hide anything in this book. I talk about the tough things in my life. And I talk about the tough moments and the issues that were difficult for me. And the people who were hard for me. And there were many. But that doesn't mean that those experiences are negative experiences in the sense of helping you grow. And so for all those teachers out there, for all of you who are mentors to others, for all of you who help grow other people, you're the role models. How you choose to live your life, what you choose to give back to others, that's what makes you a hero. So to the extent that I'm presenting myself to the world, it's because of everything my role models showed me. The love and the willingness to extend my hand to others.
So that's right. That is. So at Tulane, as well as at other universities, we're constantly thinking about how we, in a sense, support students from very different backgrounds from across the United States and the globe. And I know that you entered Princeton when you were one of the first women at Princeton.
Third year of women at Princeton University. The first only had 50 transfer students. The second had a slightly bigger class, and mine was even slightly bigger than that. But I don't think it was more than 15, 20% at the time. And now it's almost 50%, if not over.
It's changed a little.
It's changed a lot.
You also were probably one of the few Latinx students at Princeton.
A handful. I think in all 4 years, in a school with close to 5,000 students, we were maybe 35 Latinx students.
In the entire school.
In the entire school. But we were less than 10, yeah.
How, what special challenges did that raise for you? What did Princeton, or what should universities do to support students from various backgrounds?
Well, I don't think it's just Latin students.
Right.
And one of the things I've learned in being vulnerable and talking about my challenges in life is that it's not just people of color who suffer from being different. There are people from all sorts of backgrounds and upbringings, whether you're poor or you're rich, who can sometimes feel alienated from the environments they're in. But for a lot of third world or minority students, for many of them, college education is still a great unknown. Most of them, if not all of them, or a large number of them, they're likely the first generation in college. And even those who might be a second generation, they have had parents who themselves were first generation and didn't really know how to maximize what they could get out of their educational setting. I think universities would be better served if they really did an exposure to students about, first, how to do something very simple. How do you study? It's really different from high school. It's like, think about your switch from grammar school to high school and how different the two were. And even for those of you who had advanced courses in high school, there's a quantum leap between high school for many kids and college. And teaching how to budget time and talking about how to do papers, not at the last minute, but how to think about budgeting your time and how to do the research. All of those are basic skills that I think schools take for granted and don't realize those are learned skills. And that you can learn them in college as you go along, but it's going to show in the student's transcript if someone is not helping them get to that higher end point quicker. I talk about in my book, when I started Princeton, I wasn't flunking out. I was getting a mixture of B's and 3 B's and 1 A minus. I made it my goal the next semester to do 2 A's and 2 B's. And I got that, 2 A minuses. The third semester I did 3 A minuses and a B. And by the fourth, I got the hang of it, all right? But it took me the space of 2 years to get there. That can be accelerated if there's a support system that tells kids, these are the opportunities. I'm going to give you a booklet with all the student activities, but how about we sit down and talk about what you like to do? What are your interests? And do you like big groups or little groups? Do you need or want to learn about some special skill set? Are you interested in a particular hobby you want to explore? My school counselors didn't do that. I'm not sure school counselors do that as well yet today. And then the hardest thing, how do you teach students to be open about themselves to make friends? You think that comes naturally, don't you? Throw them in a school dorm and they'll figure out how to be friends with each other. For some kids, that's true. Some of you, I'm sure, are very social. But how many kids know of kids in the dorms who are a little bit isolated? who really don't have a wide circle. And how many of you have taken the time to reach out to that student and sit down and just talk with them? I'm not asking you to raise your hands, but I bet I have a lot of hands in this room that would be raised if I asked you to raise them. Meaning, all of you know those students. And I bet most of you would admit that you haven't taken the time. Not because you don't want to, but because you don't think about it. Just ask. And so for me, the life tutorials, I went to college and had never, ever had a checking account. My mother didn't have one. We were so poor that she cashed her check. Have you ever seen one of those money order places that you go into and cash checks? That's where she cashed her check. That's where she paid her bills. I didn't know how to balance a checkbook. And they wouldn't let me pay except by check if I went to the student bookstore. So I had to figure out how to open an account. These are fundamental things, and most kids may not need to learn that. But I think colleges have to figure out how to also engage in helping kids who need basic life skills. How to clean your room. How many of you have a roommate that's a mess? Yeah, I see a lot of hands going up, okay? How do you talk about that? How many of you have actually sat down to talk to them about them, except other than complaining? Basic life skills. And I think college is the perfect place to engage students in those things.
That's a wonderful description of what it means to go to college and the obligations of us as a university to support students who come from wildly different backgrounds.
Tremendously different backgrounds. But I also think some students don't know how to succeed. And they don't know the importance of reaching out and getting to know people who are different than themselves. They don't know how to really navigate course curricula and figure out what suits them and doesn't suit them. All of these things are things that colleges should be paying attention to. And you're right, you're opening your door to students from around the world. That means you're going to have students of all varying levels.
But that's our strength, obviously.
Exactly.
But our obligation. I would like to open this up to some of our student questioners, and I will start.
All right, are they in the front or are they throughout the audience?
I believe they're not in the front, but I do believe they're
All right,
around.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I hate sitting still. If you read my biography, my memoir, My Beloved World, you'll learn that when I was a child, I never sat still. My mother called me ahi, which to her was hot pepper, because I was always jumping around. I told the story the other day that I was at a book event with my cousin, who the middle school teacher, who one day when her daughter was misbehaving, she thought, at a family function said to her, "You're as bad as your cousin Sonia was when she was little." I looked at Miriam and said, "Well, you hope she grows up a little like me." But you're going to see some uniformed and not uniformed people with little things in their ears. Their security, not because of you, but because of me. I do things they don't like. I don't like standing on stage. I want to see your faces, okay? And I want the people in the back not to stare at me on a screen, because you can watch TV to do that, all right? So I'm going to walk around. But there is a commitment. There's a commitment you have to make to the security people. You can't jump up unexpectedly. because that scares them. So unless I have you stand up or your name is called out, stay seated, okay? I'll take hugs, I'll take handshakes, all right? But don't stand up. All right, Mike, what's
All right.
first?
So our first student questioner is Joseph Sotomayor from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Joe?
Justice Sotomayor, it's an honor to speak with you. My question, I am a senior in political science and international relations. Yes, ma'am. My question, I've loved all my history classes. Yes, ma'am. My question's short, and it's what gives you hope?
What gives me hope? You do. No. Joseph, I tell little kids, but it's true for big kids too. Compared to me, you're all big kids now. Look at this world. The adults like me, the people in power, we're leaving you a horrible world, aren't we? We've got wars, we've got poverty, we have health problems, we have political problems, we have environmental problems. We're leaving you with a world filled with difficulties. We haven't figured out how to make a better world. So the only thing that gives me hope is that our young people can do a better job than we did. That's what I'm out here talking to you about. I'm out here to talk to you about your promise, about your optimism, about your energy, and how you're charged with making a better world. And it's because of that hope, that's what keeps me going. Because without it, I would give up and walk away. It's pretty ugly. And the only thing that keeps me from despair is understanding we live to make a more perfect union. Every one of you is charged with figuring out what step you can take in the world to make it better. Not all of you can become Supreme Court justices. Not all of us can be on world platforms, okay? So how do we do that? We do it in the everyday steps that each of us takes to identify a problem that's important to us and to change it, to be change agents in the things that are important. And so for me, that's my hope. My hope is you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here.
Our second questioner is
Oops. Sorry.
Autumn Nieves from New York City, New York.
All right, a place I like a little bit. Hi. You can come around, but ask the question, Mike, and then she can walk around and meet me.
Okay.
So my question to you is, how do you maintain your individual voice while working for the court?
Yeah, more.
I stand alone too often. So it's too individual too often. I said to a group of students, or someone recently, was it earlier today, that I was blessed with having a role model, Justice John Paul Stevens, who just died this past summer. Justice Stevens, how are you? Joseph, when I come down, come and get your picture. I forgot to give it. He taught me through his life, work, and through many conversations that we had, especially when I first began as a justice. I would call him up and say, John Paul. I was one of the few people who called him John Paul. He was John to most people, but I just liked John Paul. And I think he liked it too. But at any rate, I would say to him, you listed that case for discussion among the justices, even though there's no chance that the other justices will hear that case. Why did you do that? And he said, Sonia, you have the obligation to ensure that we as justices are thinking about people's issues and considering them seriously. And he said, and there will be cases where you know you're listing them, not because they'll be granted, but because they should be talked about. And there will be other cases in which you will write about those cases we're not taking because you want others to be paying attention. And you hope sometimes that you might convince your colleagues, but if you can't convince them, maybe you can convince others to do the right thing. And so how I've maintained my voice is remembering his words always, that when I see something that makes me stop because it appears unjust to me, and contrary to what I understand the law requires, that I not walk away from it, that I say something about it. And so that's how I've maintained my voice. Now, I want you to understand as young people, the law is not just in the sense of right and wrong. If it were, there are so many things that would turn out differently in courtrooms. But they don't. They don't, because what the law is a way of regulating people's relationships with one another. It's a way of taking competing interests that we have with one another, both interest in what we need and the other person needs, and limited resources and not enough to go around to fix or address everyone's problems. And what the law does is order all of those things. But it's not doing it for individuals. It's doing it for a structure where we can live together within rules, hopefully, that give us some sense of predictability about our relationships, about how and what is going to be recognized in the law as something that the law will fix. But it'll fix it in a very sort of objective, sort of non-individual way. The law says this, but we're not black and white, are we? Life is very gray. And so many of the things that judges deal with are in those gray areas. Which side of the line is it on? Within or without? Does the fact that we say it's within mean that that's just? No. It's not. But it's what the only justice we can give you is to tell you what the law says. But the sense of what the law says is something you can change. Laws are passed by men and women. They're signed by presidents who are human beings. And they can be revoked and modified and amended and changed when they no longer serving the purpose that we in our society think is the right purpose. And that's what you have to remember about the law all the time. And that's what you have to remember about your participation as members of our community, which is if you don't like something that's happening out there, get up and change it. Don't complain about it. Don't give up. If you can vote, anyone who misses an election, shame on you. Shame on you. Men and some women gave up their lives in countless wars to defend our freedom. And we have a Constitution that obliges you to do only one thing. to vote. To vote to keep our republic alive. And so for me, that is the most important part of my voice, which is to try to ensure that every day I try to promote what I think the law requires and to inspire you to believing that you can make a difference. So that's how I keep my voice. That's how I keep my voice.
That was beautiful. I can't imagine a more eloquent statement about our obligation both to our country and to public service. The third student questioner, Trinidad Reyes from Chicago, Illinois. Unfortunately, a distance, but you can make
Trinidad,
your way over.
where are you? You'll have to ask your question from there so I can start answering it, but then walk over here.
For me, the biggest motivation is the community of immigrants that helped raise me on the west side of Chicago. So my question is, what do you miss the most about the Bronx? And how do you bring the Bronx and your Puerto Rican culture to DC?
Oh, I love the New York Yankees, even when they lose. I love the Bronx Zoo, the Botanical Gardens, the Staten Island Ferry, the Empire State Building, Lincoln Center. I love the sights, the smells, the food in New York, and I love the variety of people. There is every ethnic food you can imagine in the world. It's sold in New York. And every person from around the world you will find on the city streets. You can't walk down a city street in New York without staring at its people. Because you talk about differences, there's no normal person in New York. Differences are just what we are, all of us. And Washington is wonderful, but nothing is New York City. So's New Orleans. How do I keep the Bronx? Well, first of all, if you can't tell from my accent, I haven't been able to shed that. I'll say. During the confirmation process, now you're all going to notice it. I was asked, I've said it right, right? They had to take the word axe, out of my vocabulary and my speeches because I couldn't say it without the Bronx X. When I'm conscious, I say it right, but if I'm just talking, the Bronx comes out 100%, okay? It's amazing because my Spanish is unaccented, but I can't get the Bronx out of me. So, Trinidad, where did you go back to? How do I bring New York back, keep it in the court? Well, occasionally I bring back bagels with me. When she was eating them, one day I brought back cookies and pastry from New York City. I invite every relative I have, and most of them still live in the Bronx, to come visit me in Washington. And I remind people every day about how special New York is. One of the strangest moments for me was during September 11th. I, like virtually all New Yorkers, was glued to the TV the first week. I lived very close to the courthouse, which was very close to the World Trade Center. And the courts were closed for nearly 2 weeks. At any rate, I'm watching TV one of the nights, and there's this lady from the Midwest somewhere, and she's talking about the bombing. and I heard her say, um, you know those New Yorkers? They're just like us. They're really nice people. And I remember being struck by her saying that. It was like, what did you think we were? Did we have two horns coming out of our head? No, I remember sitting there and thinking, oh my gosh, they really do think we're different. And we think they're different. I tell the story in my memoir of being at Princeton, and I'm sitting next to a lady from Alabama, a classmate from Alabama, and she's talking to me, and I'm having a hard time understanding her. And there's my roommate and another friend speaking Spanish, and she's saying, oh, how wonderful it is to be here. Look at all of these wonderful, fascinating, different people. And I'm sitting there going, you're the different one, not me. But that sense of difference is in all of us. And that's why I love New York, because it teaches you more acceptance of that. And sometimes I think we all forget that in each other, don't we? That's part of why it's sometimes hard to think of people who come from different parts of our country and realize we're all like that. So, Mike, we haven't. Absolutely.
I'm diabetic too.
Pump or Dextone?
Injection.
Injection. I did that for the pen, right?
Yep.
Okay.
You were my inspiration to go back on injections. I was on a pump and then I went back on an injection.
I'm glad you.
Somehow I feel I'm at a rock concert. Last question
Get a deck.
from Constantino Rea from Sacramento, California.
Hi, thank you for coming. You're a strong role model for the Latinx community, so I really appreciate you being here. Given that, the background of the current judiciary, do you believe efforts should be made to diversify the court based off gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, and legal expertise?
Thank you.
Boy, that's like a lot of criteria. Tell me your name again.
Constantino Raya.
Hello, Constantino. Come over, get your picture. Let me say the following. There's 9 of us. We cannot represent the country. And we can't represent all of the people of the United States. It's just, the number's too small. More importantly, there's 9 of us who you're stuck with for the rest of our lives. Which means in your lifetime, the court is likely to change maybe 1.5 times. People will often ask me, do you think we'll ever have a female Supreme Court justice? And my answer is, I expect so, but it may not be in my lifetime, because Chief Justice Roberts is younger than I am. All right, he may be there longer than I am. And so it may not be in my lifetime or yours. And so we really, yes, there should be some attention paid to diversity of all kind, whether it's gender, ethnic, or religious or geographical. I have a diversity that I think is more important right now, and one that nobody seems to be paying a lot of attention to, but I think is more critical. We don't have a court that has diversity in its legal experiences. We have no criminal defense lawyers on the court. Not a one. Other than Ruth Bader Ginsburg. How about we got that picture? Other than Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we have no civil rights lawyer. We have no lawyer who's done environmental law, no lawyer who's done immigration law, no lawyer who's done so many important fields of practice and life in our country. Without that experience, we're not likely to have a court that is going to be either reflective of the profession or of the society, because all of those areas of law touch people's lives in enormous ways. And it's not that I can't learn about those other areas, I do, but voices in the room can bring perspectives that you can't just learn from books. And so for me, yes, there should be more diversity, but let's not limit it to just the factors you talked about. Let's think about diversity in a wider way, and one in which we're thinking about what is it that the court should reflect. And for me, it should reflect the society and the things that affect it, and all of the things that affect it. Securities law is important, but most of my colleagues have done securities law. How many of you have been affected by securities law? I'm not being mean. Many of us have been. I'll be up there in a minute. We'll be Mike, you have one more question in there?
We've finished with the student questions. I'll ask you a very quick question.
You do
myself.
one more so I can finish this row and then come down to you.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So we have a broad section of people across this room from the law school and across the university. So clearly you've had a legendary career as a justice, but suppose you had not gone to law school. What would you have done in your life?
Baseball commissioner. Joseph.
This way.
This way, to her. I have a further answer, Mike. The real answer is, as you'll learn from my memoir, is that I've wanted to be a lawyer and a judge since about 10 and 10 and a half years old. I was one of those unusual children. My poor niece suffered because she didn't figure out what she wanted to be. Well, she's in her 30s and she hasn't yet. And we've talked a lot about the differences of why, and I told her, you know, I was lucky. I found my passion early. And I really have never wanted to do anything else, and I've loved what I do and everything I've done. And so for me, there isn't any other profession that would work. But what I want to tell you all, because I suspect that some of you may not know what you want to do yet, is that what you have to look for is that thing that makes you passionate. That thing that engages you in a way that leaves you at the end of a night studying it, wanting more. What course or courses are you not just reading the assigned materials, but are you actually taking your own free time and going to find another book to teach you something else? What activity does that profession do that leaves you excited, that makes you feel good about accomplishing something? And can you be honest enough with yourself not to judge your own passion by other people's expectations? And what do I mean by that? We are so stuck in thinking that there are only doctors, lawyer, Indian chief. I'm not insulting Indian chiefs. because they represent, in that old saying, sort of the professions that everybody should aspire to. Because Indian chief's the leader of a community, and so you want to be a leader of your community, right? But a community doesn't run with all those people. The world doesn't run with just those people. The world runs with the people who make your beds at hotels, the bus drivers who take you back and forth to school, the people who serve food. It runs with people at computer desk, and it runs with people who deliver packages. Are all of those people dumb? No. They have their own passions, the things they can do that give them satisfaction. And even though you're college educated, there may be professions that you want to do that are not, to other people, the most socially redeeming professions. How many of you want to be accountants? No, seriously, there's one out there. But the accountants I know love what they do. They love helping the businesses and organizations and individuals to run their companies, to run their life in a way where they can manage their resources and get things done they want to do. She's shaking her head yes. I know, because although I couldn't be an accountant, I have friends who are, and they have found joy in their work. And so for me, when I say to you, find your passion, is stop looking at what other people expect it to be. Stop judging its social worth by other people's standards. Enjoy what you're doing. And if you enjoy what you're doing, no matter what it is, you can make a difference. When I leave a tip, my biggest tip are the people who are happiest at the work they're doing. Because they're treating me as special, not because I'm a justice, but because we're having fun together. And if you can do that in your life and in your world, you will have succeeded. So spend your time finding that passion.
Yes, come on up. Let me say, this has been an incredible kickoff for this series. This has been not only a seminar about what it means to be a great justice, but what it means to be a great human being.
Oh, you're so
And the
sweet.
two are so connected.
Thank you all.
I have two gifts. Just 2 seconds. I have two gifts to give to the justice. First of all, as you know, her beloved Yankees did not make it into the World Series, but we have another team for her to root for. And so we have a Tulane baseball jersey. But
Thank you.
and the 10 is for 10 years on the Supreme Court.
I love my shirt. This is really cute, guys. I like your mascot.
By the way,
Pelican.
it's not red, so there's no going to be misconception that you're a Red Sox fan.
Believe me, they'll never be that.
And our second gift is really in recognition of Justice Sotomayor's career and what this has meant to the Tulane community. We have established a 4-year full tuition scholarship for a student at Tulane who is dedicated to public service in honor of Justice Sotomayor.
That's, I love you all. Thank you.
Thank you all.